Welcome to Clever Orbits, a unabashedly Star Trek podcast where we bring graduate-level interpretation, engagement, analysis, and fun to the literature that is Star Trek. I am one of your hosts. My name is Brantmeyer, and I'm here because I have a burning passion and desire to explore and enjoy this thing which I have loved for as long as I can remember, Star Trek. It's, in fact, one of my first memories from the crib, watching Next Gen on the TV, in community with other amazing, brilliant, fun people, including Tyler Brantmeyer. We'll start with you. Why are you here? What do you love about Star Trek?
I'm here because seeing as how I'm your brother, I sort of grew up alongside that, and I developed a love for it myself, seeing almost every series 4 or 5 times. The idea of a new Star Trek series, when I first heard about Discovery, I was elated, to say the least. And I'm incredibly, absurdly excited to talk about this new series. And I love Star Trek. I love everything that it represents, and I love everything that it does and how it reflects our culture. That's why I'm here.
Thank you, Tyler. And we've got the amazing, the brilliant, the deadpan, PhD in linguistics, Richard Landy Jones Futrell. Sorry, I gave them your middle name.
Hi, I'm Richard, and I'm here because it's fun.
Richard, always the straight shooter.
Mm-hmm.
So, why would one, just real quick, for those of you who are not familiar with Star Trek, I'll give you 1 minute to enter into this world with us. I know most of you are really excited about Star Trek who are listening. Most of you are really excited about Star Trek Discovery, and all of you probably really want to hear what comes next. And I'm committed that you all, no matter where you come from, have the experience of being welcomed here. So Star Trek, it's 51 years old. It's one of the most well-known, renowned, and powerful, and politically, socially, scientifically, ethically sensitive pieces of literature ever written. It's complex. It's 700-plus hours of material that many great minds find interesting things in and time to connect the dots between. And so a big part of what we're going to do here is connect those dots, notice those dots, enjoy those dots, and talk about those dots. It's like a Rorschach on some level, like all art is, and I'm really grateful that it has happened. So who wants to start us off with kind of the non-spoiler summary of this episode, like just how it landed?
Richard, you got something?
Non-spoiler that's hard. That's a hard target to deliver.
Yeah.
Let's see. So I don't know. So let's set the stage. Like, there's this new Star Trek series. It's got announced, and we heard it. it's originally going to be the showrunner is going to be Brian Fuller, and then maybe he's out, maybe he's in. I don't know. It's a little turbulent.
Yeah, there's this
we were told
whole
that
political backdrop.
We were told that the touchstone for the series was going to be the episode Balance of Terror, which was, Gene Roddenberry's second favorite episode from the original series. And, the big question in the fan community is it really going to be like, quote, real Star Trek, by which they mean, I guess, intellectually interesting and, I don't know, poses interesting, deep questions? Or is it just going to be, the dreaded J.J. Abramsification of Star Trek, where it's just all basically space violence? And so going into it, we immediately see, I don't know, there's lots of colors, there's lots of lots of lens flare, there's lots of shiny stuff. It does have this sort of visual style from J.J. Abrams.
Let me stop you right there. Star Trek is so much more than lens flares. Like, anybody who judges something by its lens flares is definitely judging a book by its cover. Anyway, please continue.
So I think really, though, if you sort of look beyond the lens flares, you'll see that it's a very interesting and intricate story about characters who are not simple, who are sort of torn between different instincts, and there's some tension in them. We see a very fast-paced action plot, it's true, but it's against villains who are not only the physical but also the intellectual challengers of Starfleet and the Federation and its ideas.
Yeah,
and who look really cool, too.
It should be noted that while there are some parallels with the villain of Star Trek Beyond, like, this is a fully fleshed out villain and villain set.
Yeah.
And, like, nuance and complexity and intricacy. And the series goes out of its way to tell 2 points of view, 2 different stories about the events that are happening, which is pretty distinct, pretty unique.
It is.
So please continue.
It really is sort of delivering on something that Star Trek Beyond promised and did not deliver. But anyway, I don't know. I'm not sure really what I can say about the summary without spoiling the plot. So, it follows this first officer, Michael Burnham, aboard the USS Shenzhou under Captain Giorgio. And they find themselves in a tough situation with, I guess, the Klingons. I guess it's fair to say that it's not a spoiler to say this show involves a conflict with the Klingons.
Oh, yeah.
Things rapidly escalate. We have shocking character moments. We have pretty cool stuff.
Well, we have good space violence. I mean, like, if you're up for space violence, this is decent.
Yeah, I think we'd be amiss to say that the space violence is not enjoyable.
Yeah, it's pretty gorgeous, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say almost every frame from every scene from both episodes could easily become like a screensaver, backdrop, like background. Like, I was just like, wow, this is all beautiful art. This is like well done. So anyway, yeah, thanks, Richard. That was a great, like, you did manage a spoiler-free kind of summary that I think caught the heart of it. So
let's crack into the spoilers now.
Yeah, let's crack. So anybody who's listened to this point, please be aware there are spoilers that follow. Stop listening if you've gotten enough of this and haven't seen the episode. Go watch it and come back. So I had the real experience while watching this of Star Trek as kind of a long series of bedtime stories that I've been told, like Greek mythology, Norse mythology or something. And William Shatner in one of the interviews for the 50th or one of the recent, anniversaries talks about this. He's like, yeah, that's the pull of Star Trek. It's modern mythology. Ancient Greece had these stories about Zeus, and now we have this really wide range and complex thicket of Star Trek stories, and they're inspiring, and they're integrated with modern culture and technology and science and ethical dilemmas. And so anyway, I feel like this fit right into that. Michael Burnham she's not quite a mythical character, because if it's going to be a Netflix show and it's going to be modern, it's got to be gritty and realistic and like nuanced and, ethically questionable at times. Like her, she, of course, does the Vulcan neck pinch on her captain, which I thought was, what the heck, crazy. I mean, I knew that she was very committed to the course of action, and I knew she was going to do some sort of covert resistance. I could tell when I saw on her face. I was like, oh, yeah, she's just placating her captain to put her captain in a false sense of security. Like, she's definitely going to do something. But the neck pinch, I didn't think of that exactly. So what did you guys think of that moment?
Well, I mean, I think the real tension in that scene is Michael Burnham acting emotionally, or is she really just logically following the logical advice from Sarek? Which I do think was logical and well justified, which we'll talk about. Sarek counsels her to strike the Klingons first because that's the language the Klingons understand. I think that's completely logical, and the people online that say it's not logical because it's violent just haven't really thought it through. Sometimes violence is logical. But anyway, the question is Michael Burnham really acting out of logic, or is she acting out of emotional scarring because the Klingons killed her family, which is what resulted in her being taken as a ward by Sarek? And I think that scene really keeps you on the edge, and it really doesn't resolve the tension of what's going on. Because Michael Burnham, she does sort of adopt a Klingon rhetoric, and she does have a point, but she is in a heightened state of, emotion. She's like screaming when she goes out onto the bridge. And so, I don't know, I found this to be one of the most interesting parts because it created this question, this tension about her real motivations, and it didn't let it up. So we still have that conflict.
Yeah, I think she and where she stands and how she really is one of the biggest draws of this whole thing. Like, so she has been trained, and of course she was adopted by Sarek, and how did I put it? She takes on her Vulcanness, and then we missed the whole 7 years where she kind of has it become an option. Like, she's not Spock. She's enough like Spock for everybody in the audience to be like, oh, yeah, there's the Spock character, great. And to have something familiar. And in the very early scenes, there's that. with her relationship with Georgiou. And in the later scenes, as she becomes more emotional, and you see her like this tension within her character, you start to realize, oh, she's trained as a Vulcan in the Vulcan way of life, but she's learned to express herself as a human. So she takes joy in her flight to the sacred beacon, is what the Klingons later call it. And then she gets clearly a little scared when she sees that monstrous, cool-looking torchbearer in the suit that we only see for about half a minute, probably less. Like, it's a really elaborate butte, and a lot of reviewers, like in the Penske file, they comment like, wow, I really hope they bring that back because they spent a lot of time on it, clearly, and we only saw it for like 10 seconds. Yeah, I think Georgiou, there's this whole 7 years that we see in the background of her retraining Burnham into experiencing that Vulcan side of her personality as an option. So I think even though she doesn't have the best handle on her emotions, and she probably was acting out of what she really believed was logically the right action in that moment, like, I think she went through that whole arc that Spock did from the original series through the movies to Undiscovered Country, where he's kind of integrated his feelings. But for her, it's more rocky, and this one point of trauma with the Klingons is the spot where she's not good with it, where it doesn't hang well. And then we see in the promo for the next episode she gets into a fight, which I like to believe is her logically responding to people threatening her like survival, which is interesting because that makes this show, among other ways, a lot more like Battlestar Galactica, which was Brian Fuller's, sort of complaint about Voyager, which so Brian Fuller, the person who was going to helm this show and left his imprint on the first several episodes, he was kind of annoyed and upset that there weren't narrative consequences to things like the Year of Hell on Voyager. Like, okay, so the ship's messed up for 2 days, and then there's a reset button which makes none of it happen. Well, great. Or we ran out of shuttles. No, we didn't. We got a new one. We're good, which is that, bane of everyone's existence joke. But here, Star Trek is going in a completely different direction than it was during most of Voyager and during most of Next Gen. I mean, they had small arcs, but nothing that was, like, dramatic, nothing that was super serious. I mean, in Deep Space Nine, yes, that's the exception. But here, something's at stake, and things change and shift, and characters grow and develop in really palpable and clear ways, much like they did in Battlestar Galactica, which, as another couple points on that, I love Battlestar Galactica, and I'm not sure if you noticed this, Tyler, but at every break, at the end of every act, there was like a boom. Did you hear that? You know what I'm talking about?
I did.
The commercial breaks?
Yeah, which was, as I recall, what Battlestar did. Like, this like something being dropped or a burden being let go of, sound, like
candle being snuffed out.
Or the end of a chapter, like the closing of a book, or the turning of a page even though pages are not that heavy. So yeah, I think that, and then the graphics and the grittiness of the characters, the CGI, and the music set this show apart from all the rest. But anyway, with all, I'm sure we want to talk about Burnham more. What else do you guys think about Burnham?
Wow. I mean, the real question, I think, is what's going to happen for her going forward. We sort of had a nice contained arc in these 2 episodes involving her. We saw in the preview for the future that she's going to be in a different uniform. She's going to be in a prisoner transport or something. So the real question is where she's going, I think.
Because she ends up being a part of the crew for the Discovery, but we want to know how she gets there, how she gets noticed by Captain Lorca.
She ends up being there. We don't see her in a uniform.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take something. It's going to take, like, battlefield commissioners for her to start serving in Starfleet again. And so Lorca, Jason Isaacs has described his character as just effing nuts. Like, he's just a crazy guy. And really committed to war, really excited about war. And so I think there's going to be this resonance between his kind of off-kilter outlaw nature and her being cast as an outlaw. I mean, suddenly all of her friends don't like her. Suddenly no one really wants to be around her. And he's like, oh, yeah, I kind of get that. And you get that in some of the trailers. Like, he's kind of chummy with her. But I think it's because as he says in the trailers, I want to give you a chance to stop this war. So which really what I learned from this past weekend, like watching these episodes, I'm done with trailers. I'm done with spoilers. I'm done with reading notes.
Yeah.
Like, I knew too much of this episode. I mean, like, I knew enough of it to still be interested and really curious and really excited, but I knew too much of it, and I think it would have been a different experience if I had not known as much as I did. And, I have to share this, watched it on a $2,000 LG OLED, like 60-plus inch, beautiful screen, and I highly recommend that for anybody. And then the whole question of CBS All Access, I mean, if you got the money, just do it. You get access to After Trek, and then you can watch the episode as many times as you want during the week afterwards, which invariably you will want to because this is cinematic quality television. I mean, it's
definitely worth rewatching.
Oh,
most
yeah.
certainly.
I mean, I'm thinking about rewatching it a third time, or rewatching it a second time after having watched it twice already. So, yeah. What else do you guys want to talk about on this episode? I've got a lot. I mean, don't want to dominate too quickly, too hard.
Let's see. James Frayne Sarek. Any thoughts on him?
He's good. He's elegant. It's interesting. He seems more, not sure of himself isn't the word, kind of like emboldened. He's more involved. He's more engaged. My theory is that he really gives a lot of attention and energy, and always has, to Michael Burnham, which is why Spock at some point felt neglected. And then even more so, he loses Michael Burnham, and it causes a rift in the family because it has something to do with him, like making some mistake or encouraging her on some specific path, and he closes off. And that's why we see him in Journey to Babel, like, closed off to Spock. Like, he can't open emotionally the way that he did to Michael Burnham, because I think he was here. Like, it was under the surface in the traditional classic Vulcan way that you still see in Star Trek IV, where like they're having this conversation in front of Kirk, as Spock and Sarek, and you can tell that they both love each other, and they're just not going to say it because they're Vulcan. And so here you kind of see him experimenting, playing around with that style of interaction, but he's not going to keep it. We know from the original series he's not always going to be that way, so there has to be some reason, and I think it's because Michael Burnham dies at the end of this series. I called it. You heard it here first.
Would explain later on why we don't hear much, but then again, Sarek, and perhaps he thought that his approach to Michael Burnham has to be different from his approach to his own blood, his own son, Spock, based on, well, she's human, and she's been through this trauma, and I have an opportunity to help guide her. I have an opportunity to help raise her, and, help her become someone that she wouldn't otherwise have been able to do if she had been left to her own devices after the Klingons killed her parents.
Yeah, he kind of rehabilitates her.
Yeah.
In fact, he kind of, I would venture to suggest he brings her back to life. He has given her, this is just my theory. He gives her part of his katra, which is why, he says as much. And that part of his katra, like, he literally is saying when he's mind melding with her, come back to me, something along those lines. And so I think, like, he's got this deep, energetic connection with her from far away because part of him is literally, part of his, like, life force energy or whatever is inside of her. And
life force energy can travel at warp speed so they can communicate in real time.
Well, Bell's theorem, right? We know this from quantum mechanics, that
like subspace radio.
Particles that are separated by miles of distance can transmit instantaneous bits of information.
No, they can't transmit information. They can't transmit information. That's not true. But that's
really?
That's a tangent. That's not relevant to Star Trek. Let's continue.
Oh, okay. Well, so we should have a conversation about quantum mechanics offline. That'd be fun. So Michael gives the feeling of Spock. I like that they were literally on the very dry Planet Exposition in the beginning. Like let's talk about what's going on. Sorry, I kind of stole Clay's joke from the Penske Files. That's more of an
some
homage.
of the writing and the yeah.
It's been described as clunky, but I suppose it was
in like
needed.
the first few minutes.
A lot of people didn't like the Delta Shield in the desert.
Yeah, it was a bit silly, but whatever. It was a few minutes long. It was like Takufma looked at the screen and said, their fatal greeting is, "We come in peace." And then we cut to Michael Burnham saying, "We come in peace. That's the point of Starfleet, right?" That not the best writing moment, but overall, it's not.
Well, so
totally
otherwise, a huge swath of transition, both in writing and in visual appearance. Were really well done. I was so present to that throughout most of the second episode. It was directed really well, and it was screen written very well. The cinematography, as well as how they connected the scenes. I mean, except for in the beginning, but I think they were kind of going for. Here's what I think. I think they were kind of going for that clunky, expositional style of the original series. They wanted to have you feel like it was old school Star Trek. They were like, all right, guys, we know what you want. We know who we're marketing to. And it's this hodgepodge. Honestly, what they were also thinking was, it's this hodgepodge of fans who, some of you only like the more recent Treks. Some of you only like these new movies you just saw in the past couple years. And some of you have been around for 50 years. We're going to cater to all of you. And I think they managed to do a fine job. Of course, never going to be perfect, and it's polarizing. But it captures the simple joy of Trek past while admitting the fact that we are in a new time where we have new special effects. And I think Richard, your judgment that we've got kind of an unreliable narrator, or the telling of the tale changes based on the time. In fact, when you look at it as mythology, the canon doesn't matter as much. But when you look at it as modern mythology, canon matters because we approach the universe with reason and science and non-contradiction, and we're trying to make it all cohere and make sense of it. So there's a subtle philosophical point about the fact that, hey, they're trying. They may not always succeed. I mean, I've seen instances where things kind of don't quite add up, but we are personally trying to make sense of it because we're committed to rational non-contradiction, coherence, and it all making sense. But it really has to be slick and new and full of special effects because of marketing. I mean, if they want to draw in enough people, and they drew in 9 million people to watch the episode last night, which is pretty cool, then it needs to engage people's attention. And I know from being a more or less professional marketer for the past 2 months through being trained by Artemis and making Austin Life Empowered work, that marketing, it's a very particular realm. And if you want to get people's attention, you have to play to your audience. And that's where all the lens flares and all the Apple Store looks on the bridge and all the warp speed jumps, just like from the new movies, came from.
Not just like.
It came. What's that?
Not just like.
Oh, well, I mean, it was almost exactly like some of it.
Pretty similar.
Okay, well, I mean, that's being generous. But
on the movies, they just go pop. And on this thing, there's the part where they're stretched out and shining blue, and then they go pop.
Oh, okay. Well, that kind of makes sense. And that kind of fits with modern science around warp drive, too, which is cool.
Okay, modern science around warp drive. Yeah.
And there's one thing I really want to say to anybody. I don't want to start responding yet. I want to keep this positive for the most part. But a lot of people are kind of like, this is not Star Trek. It doesn't look the way it should. It doesn't do the things that it should. And honestly, Sarek said it best. Be careful that your assumptions are not being driven by your past. Your assumptions about what this should be, for example. This is the writers talking more or less directly to the viewer about Star Trek. And honestly, if you don't want new and different and a challenge to your assumptions about what Star Trek should be, you can have Orville, right? I mean, like, that's basically what that is. It's like a cheap ripoff of TNG that doesn't do anything much creative. I mean, I haven't watched it because I don't need to. I've seen enough and I've read enough that it's like, I mean, I might watch it one day if somebody like A Clockwork Oranges my eyes open and forces me to see it. But this Star Trek that we're watching is the torchbearer of Trek into the future, which I really like. I mean, it may not look the way that we expect, but it's really about all the spaces that we can discover in between those things that we think we know, all those blind spots that we have. And, like, it's really brilliant, I think. I mean, I can't get enough of it. I really love it. So, anyway, back to you guys.
Well said.
Thanks.
Tell you what.
Thanks.
What do you all think of Takuvma?
Oh, he's awesome. I hope he's not dead.
Yeah, me too.
What a great name, too.
Same here.
He was really, I like his speeches are great. I like his delivery of the Klingon. Every syllable's like independent. It's like that would be terrible delivery if it was English, but he's an alien. That was cool. And I don't know.
He was the best acting
Klingon. I feel like if I was a Klingon, I would definitely be in his camp because he seems like the winning side. And the whole Klingon thing is really cool because we've never seen like a Klingon prophet before, like this real like deep mystical religious thing. It's been like hinted at, but it's never been done this well, at least. And the visuals are cool, and their ornate ship is just gorgeous. And this idea that their ship is encrusted in the sarcophaguses of their dead that fell in battle is really cool.
Oh yeah,
really heavy
epic. Metal.
And also, what's cool about Takuvma is he's putting forward a coherent anti-Federation ideology. Like the Federation is this like multicultural thing, and they're saying we come in peace, and Takuvma's saying no. You know, they say they're coming in peace, but they're going to surround us, and then our culture is going to dissolve into theirs.
It's perfect, actually, coming on the heels of our long Borg arc, because he literally says our individuality will be destroyed.
Yes, and, by which I think he must mean the individuality of the Klingons as a culture.
Yeah. I mean, like, so it's clear that they resist assimilation into the Federation, just like we in the Federation would resist assimilation into the Borg.
Yeah. This is something that struck me as a little weird. It seemed like their position about being worried about being assimilated, that's a fear you would only really have if the Federation was like overwhelmingly powerful compared to them. And it seems like they're pretty closely matched. So that didn't sit entirely good. But I'm still excited to see where it goes.
Takuvma is also kind of egotistical. I am Kahless Reborn. He's clearly going after power.
Well, that's the one you want to follow, right?
I mean,
you don't want to follow leaders like, I might be, someone important maybe.
This is Star Trek post House of Cards, right? I mean, like when characters can have deep, horrifying motivations, intricate that don't
I don't
really.
think his motivations are horrifying. He wants to, at least from the perspective of his own culture, they're certainly not horrifying.
Well, yeah,
he wants to drum up a battle, but for the Klingons, and this is why the Klingons don't want to assimilate to the Federation. It's because they like violence and they like fighting, and that's why the Vulcan hello is that you have to use violence. But he also really, I think he's the whole Klingon thing is in many ways the vehicle through which this series is going to end up addressing modern issues, because this is basically like globalism versus nationalism, where the Federation is the sort of multicultural globalism, and the Klingons want to have their own individual nationalism thing that's separate. And Takuvma says, we do not want to know you. So I think this seems like this is really the big political question of our time. And, if you don't think that these Klingons have, political and philosophical relevance to the modern day, then I don't know what to tell you.
Well said. Yeah,
plus they look really cool.
I agree with that as well. Yeah, so there's something to be said about that too, right? He talks in the very first speech about atom by atom they are replacing. And what I realized was 100 years previous, the augment virus was released into the Klingon population, and a lot of Klingons had started to look like humans. So of course that belief and that argument that the the Federation, I mean, that there's your rationale, like beyond just overwhelming odds and him,
that's a good point.
Reviving this kind of ancient faith in Kalas, which we should talk about that too. That's really cool. But it's this sense that our culture is literally being deformed, and our people are genetically being deformed by the Federation. And I think this Klingon Federation war might not have happened had the Augments not unleashed that virus onto that Klingon colony in season 4 of Enterprise. Like it's just so palpable a threat and a fear for them that the Federation and politically to have an example like that to point to, whoa, that's just, I mean, that's like we have the Nazis. We can point to them as something we don't want. And they can point to something in cultural memory that's so palpable that they don't want, that they're like, it's easy to get motivated. Now, that's not to say all the Klingons in those scenes were good actors. I mean,
in particular, I'm worried about Vulcan. I'm worried about him. I don't know if he's going to be as good as Takufma, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think I like him. I think I like him, but the Klingon High Council was interesting and cool, and the use of holograms is interesting, but the great bulk of like the unwashed masses of Klingons in those scenes, especially with the the death yell, I thought, even with Takufma, that could have been acted a little better. There could have been some more force applied to those yells.
Like louder.
I remember, yeah, exactly. I remember in Heart of Glory, when you very first see it, it's terrifying. Like in The Next Generation, where it's Worf and the guy who plays Admiral Forrest and some other guy, like they're just like, it's really blood curdling, and you get the real sense that like, oh yeah, the people in hell need to hear, or the people in Sto-vo-kor, need to hear that a warrior is coming among them. And I also really like the idea of the Klingon afterlife. That's really cool. I mean, it's very similar to, Norse mythology, where, you have all the gods just sort of fight forever and drink and feast
and have a great
until
time.
Everything ends.
Yeah, the Klingons are kind of like, what if the Vikings ended up being the dominant culture on Earth and going into space and stuff?
That's really interesting. Yeah. Whereas
instead of, I don't know, a bunch of agriculturalists, which is, I guess, what we are.
Yeah. I mean, the Greeks, right? We worship Ceres and Neptune. They hold dominion over different parts of the Earth, and they organize it and enculturate it. I mean, I'm sure there's some anthropological, structural, mythological monograph somewhere that talks about these things in more detail than I care to go into. But like relating Greek mythology to agriculturalism. But that's a really cool sort of digression to go on there. Let's see. So who liked, to switch gears abruptly, who liked the opening sequence? Didn't like it? What did you guys think?
I thought it was inventive and needed, and I enjoyed it. I didn't skip it the second time.
I like the music, but I have to say, although I love these two episodes, I'm not a fan of the intro. I wanted to see space and a spaceship flying around in space. Maybe that's just me being influenced by my past, experiences and expectations. But also the fact that it's like blueprints, it's like reminding me that this is fake. I don't want that.
So here's my idea. And I think those were actually Starfleet blueprints. Those were meant to be Starfleet blueprints. But,
okay, but they're also production blueprints.
Yeah, no. Here's what I think happened. I think the people who were making the opening sequence were like, what are we going to do? And then the production team was like, hey, guys, we're making all these really cool props. And they were like scratching their heads. Yeah, we should do that. Yeah. That sounds great. Just kind of
it does pick up toward the end. Toward the end of the intro, you see the Discovery. I guess it's the Discovery and not the Shenzhou. You see it flying around, and it's kind of cool. But it should have been flying around in space, man. That's okay. You can't win them all.
Yeah, I think they did what they did, and the music carries the day, right? They released the music a little while before they integrated into the title sequence publicly, but I think the music is definitely Star Trek. They make all these like neat little references to the original series theme song, and then they turn it into its own unique thing with its own palpable structure, great metaphor for the show itself. And then at the end, bum, bum, there's this like martial beat where you're like, oh, yeah, you guys are at war. Right. But it's not overwhelming. It's not necessarily the whole show. It's just kind of the beginning. They've already talked about how season 1 is basically going to be the Klingon War, and like they want to kind of wrap it up for season 2. They're still writing episode 15, so we don't really know 100%. But yeah, I was disappointed. I am disappointed a little bit that it's not like the others, but it needed to be different. This show is such a perpendicularity from what we know Star Trek to be, and it's got to be. It's the reinvention of Star Trek for the modern age. It's like in comic books, you get the gold and silver, and there's certain other ages of Superman, and Superman gets like reinvented, recreated. That's the other place where American mythology subsides, is in comic books. And in comic book films, I think to a lesser extent, because, you know, when it comes down to the creative activity of producing these shows, it's such a unique tension between serving new fans who like their Trek and Star Trek Abrams, and then serving old fans, and then serving new people who want to be brought in, and then serving the studios who want it to be profitable. And I mean, like, this is one of those really interesting arguments about art in general. Is like it's so coded by the conditions of its own production that is it ever like unique? Is it ever like truly something interesting, or is it really just the result of material conditions? But that's really kind of a Marxist question. I'm going to put that to the side and talk
Karl
about
Marx.
how. What's that?
Thanks, Karl Marx.
So I liked the transporter effect. It was exquisitely beautiful, and it looks more scientifically on point. Like they get kind of converted into this cloud of particles. It gets organized and moved. And there are these pretty colors, and I was just like, yeah, that's great. Because apparently Starfleet reinvents its transporter effect every 10 years, just like its uniforms, which was Tyler's brilliant point that made the uniform shift like really easy to digest. They do actually change their uniforms once every 10 years, or maybe every 20 or something. Sometimes they stick with them for a while, and then sometimes they just reintroduce new ones, like they did introduce new ones, like in Generations. So,
yeah, pretty much every series. So I do like those uniforms, though, the new ones. They're sleeker in design, and they sort of nod. I mean, every uniform that has the shield, the insignia on it, it's always going to nod to the past. But these uniforms I liked. They seemed functional. They seemed aesthetically pleasing to me. But not everyone's going to think that. Yeah.
Some people are going to like them, but you know, they're different colors. There's like silver metal parts and gold metal parts and brass metal parts for the different kinds of the ship, and they don't really look very distinguishable. Different kinds of officers doesn't look like you'd be able to really distinguish them in a tense situation. Okay. The real question though is this takes place after the cage. We know this because Michael Burnham gave the year 2256 in the opening part, which means that they must have switched from the cage uniforms to these, and then after the show is over, or maybe during the show, they're going to have to switch back to the cage uniforms for Where No Man Has Gone Before.
That's okay. I don't worry too much about that. I mean, it's interesting, and you know, you're a true fan when you're worried about how Starfleet uniforms work out over time.
This is something people are very worried about.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like,
explanation for everything.
They tried to make the uniforms somewhere between the uniforms on Enterprise and the uniforms on the original series. And one of the things you should know, too, is Shenzhou is old. Shenzhou has these lateral vector transporters, which she says, oh, yeah, they're being phased out because they use too much power. Like, those are something that I think we might expect to see in the interim between NX-01 and NCC-1701. Like, we would expect to have weird, new, interesting technologies developed and then phased out because they don't work. So these uniforms are developed, and then maybe they're phased out because they don't work, or maybe there's like a committee of people on the Federation Council having debates about fashion, and they're like, you know, those uniforms worked really well. We should bring those back. So about those like sweaters, because those are basically where No Man Has Gone Before in the Cage. Those are basically like heavy pastel sweaters.
Must be cold on the Enterprise.
Must be always cold.
They dialed down the
Very
thermostat
cold.
pretty low.
It's very cold in space.
Which, by the way, Nicholas Meyer was involved in this show, in case you're wondering. The one who wrote Wrath of Khan is an executive producer and even participated in the writing of this episode. So, sounds like a red alert. No, I'm not upset or worried. I thought the scattering field was cool. I thought it was cool that Giorgio had a telescope. It gave me this real like sense to her as like a excited to go to space kind of person. Like I think Kirk and Picard, or maybe even Archer is kind of the best example of this. Somebody who's just like diehard, excited like a little kid, like, oh my God, I want to explore space. And to know that Giorgio was kind of that kind of person, like she just wants to like be out there in it and exploring it in all these interesting old style kind of ways too. So, and it was well used by the plot. In fact, to with no segue, I thought the bridge crew of the Shenzhou was interesting. Immediately I was curious about all of them, each and every one. The blue guy with the mottled skin, the various people with like these computerized attachments to their heads, and especially Daft Punk. That's what I'm going to call that robot, because he looks just like Daft Punk. I mean, and his face, when it goes to red alert, his face turns to red alert. Like or maybe it was a she. I don't even know. I hope that's not the only time we see that thing. Because, like, there's this whole notion that there are robots in Starfleet. And just because we only know about Data as being the first android in Starfleet, like, doesn't mean there weren't other robots. Robots pre-existed Data, and there were lots of them, and maybe some were in Starfleet. I don't know.
Yeah. I think having robot crew members and saying they're different than Data because they're robots and he's an android, that's a real stretch. I bet they're just organisms that happen to have weird helmets and prostheses and that kind of stuff.
You just said you bet they're orgasms.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I bet they're organisms with those properties.
Be glad you're not teaching biology in high school.
The quintessential Freudian slip. So anyway, the bridge is really big. I feel like the bridge is too big. Like, it just doesn't need to be that big. I mean, it's comparable to the NCC 1701D. I mean, it's like, what are you doing with all that space? I mean, you had to build something around that space, the superstructure of the ship. So,
what did you think of the use of force fields to supplement the hull when they were breached?
I thought that was awesome, and it's kind of a carryover from Next Gen era. Like, it's something that you
Structural
see in
integrity
Voyager.
fields?
Yeah, you see it in Voyager, you see it in Nemesis, and I guess you see it throughout Next Gen a lot of times. But I guess it's natural for them to show these off. But I don't remember them in TOS. I do remember force fields in TOS, and like, even though they didn't talk about structural integrity, probably they had them. I thought the force fields themselves were beautiful and really well used and well done and very interesting, especially when she like leaves the one force field for the other, which we saw with Archer in the Augments trilogy. But here, like, I don't know, it was really cool. She had one of these Kirk kind of moments where she defeats the computer's logic. Like,
yeah, that was neat.
That was.
I love that.
They knew that they were showing to Star Trek fans right there. They were like, this is one of those quintessential Star Trek things. And it wasn't like fan service. It was fan service to the extent that it was, but it was also like a moment that was worked into the plot really well. It was very integrated. It wasn't like a zigzag away from what has to happen at that point. It's a natural consequence of her character, too. She's highly well trained in logic, and she uses it to her advantage when she needs to in order to survive. So, and I liked that she was kind of – actually, I don't remember if the satisfaction really showed on her face. Sonequa Martin Green, she's just brilliant, in almost everything that I saw. I mean, I don't I can't think of anything that I didn't like about her performance. It's really great to have a character like that front and center of the show, or an actor
or actress. She brings a lot of really subtle. Like, her performance is very nuanced. It's informed by so many different perspectives, as we stated at the beginning when we started talking about Michael's character. But you can actually see that. You can actually see in her face everything.
Oh,
If you're
yeah.
paying attention. Yeah.
Brilliantly expressive. In fact, this feels like a really great place to say well, first of all, this show passes the Bechdel test, which is it stars two women. They talk about something that's not men, and they talk to each other. And it's funny because, like, this was kind of a joke that was made years ago, but it turned into this really useful criterion for something that represented women well, like at least to some extent. Femininity is far more intricate, complicated, and nuanced than just those simple rules, but it's like the first nod or gesture towards appreciating and understanding women as they are in themselves and not merely as male sex objects or patriarchal totems or whatnot. And so you get this sense of them having a really palpable, beautiful, engaging, nuanced relationship. When Georgiou tells security to take Burnham to the brig, you see this slight moment where she looks at her captain and she's disappointed in herself. She's sad. She's like broken by it. And almost like Georgiou was her surrogate mother. Like Surrogate's her surrogate father, Georgiou's her surrogate mother, and she's disappointed her mother. And she says this at the end, she's my friend, right? So maybe it's less mother and more friend. But there are a lot of really cool things about the women in this show. And there is nudity, but it's non-gratuitous or semi-nudity when she comes out of the medical bay thing. But there's no male gaze contamination, which is this other concept from philosophy of film where women are objectified by the viewpoint of by the viewpoint of the camera. Like the way that the camera looks at a woman through the lens actually gives the viewer the experience of a male objectifying that character. And I detected none of that. Now it's a worthwhile question to see if that ever happens in Star Trek, which probably it doesn't. But I know it happens other places, and especially in news media, advertisements, etc. And
elsewhere in Star Trek, certainly.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
To Polk.
And I think what was that? Go ahead.
7 of 9, man.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yes.
Right. You're totally right. I forgot about that. Well, that was a ratings grab. That was
exactly
to increase our ratings by 60%. And the cat suit. Yeah, okay, so that's the great failure of Star Trek right there. Which is why Discovery is better in this aspect. And I found myself as a male, as a sexual male who's attracted to women, I found myself never distracted by her or provoked into viewing her merely or even peripherally as a sex object, which is really great. Like there's empathy with the character, because with our fiction we are training our young, right, or ourselves in how to view and relate to the world, which is why Star Trek is so powerful and important. It's because we see a bunch of different people from a bunch of different races getting together, working together, making things happen in a world that's post-capitalistic and committed to peace and harmony and self-expression and fulfillment through doing
wiping
what
out
matters.
And wiping out Klingon individuality, atom by atom.
I'm pretty sure that's not. No, yeah. I hereby dub you, Richard. You're the viewpoint of the Klingons for the rest of this podcast.
I'm totally with Takuma. That part where the Admiral comes on and says, when we're fighting, we're not talking. I was like, destroy that ship.
Oh God! And the way they destroy it is so satisfying.
Yes, it was so satisfying.
Oh.
Yeah. The way that the Klingon ship was destroyed was satisfying. Actually, a lot of the explosions were satisfying.
They were. We would.
Yeah.
There was a bit of pew pew, A lot of people on the internet say this is Star Trek Pew Pew. I think they're crazy if they think Pew Pew is not enjoyable, and there's so much more than that.
Yeah. So soon we'll get into responding to the naysayers. I want to say some more about just the episodes in general. There was a Chateau Picard wine in George's ready room, which you find that out through like reading obsessively every interview or tidbit that comes out online about this show. Not by looking at it on the screen. You'd have never been able to tell. But I like that the light of Kahless is actually a sacred beacon, a ship. We know from Worf, Next Gen, he talks about when Kahless left Kronos, he said there is that light in the sky, and when you see it, that is the light to which I go, or something like that. And so it's kind of cool that they have that ship. I liked that ship. I liked the big graveyard ship. I liked that space, the space outside of Shenzhou, and then just space in general, was a very dynamic thing. You get these two massive doubles, like the binary stars coming together. That was cool. Then you get the the blinding white light of the sacred beacon. Then finally you get the green light of the tractor beams with the Klingon ship pulling in its dead, and then you also get the blue light. And so it was a very dynamic visual experience that I don't think we don't often get in Star Trek. I mean, like, we get bits and pieces of it here and there, but that was really cool. I liked we have engaged the Klingons. So we've been doing the Borg episodes.
We heard that a lot of the trailers.
Yeah. Well, also, it's a reference to the best of both worlds. We've engaged the Borg. Like, the writers know who's watching their show. They know what we've been watching. They know what we love, which is another reason that they did that scene where Saru talks about the decks that were destroyed. And Georgia, and he slows down as he realizes, it destroyed the deck with the brig on it. It's Dex 9, and then he kind of trails off, and she's like, that includes the brig. It was a reference to Generations, when the Sulu character gets slow in talking about how Decks 13, 14, and 15 were destroyed. So that was nice. The production value, I feel, is at or above Doctor Who at times. And what I mean by that is there's this really weird kind of CGI thing that goes on, this CGI visual feel where it's beautiful and it's elegant, but you can still kind of sense the unreality of it. And this was maybe just me. And then I also felt that with music, so I like to think that the writers of this show watched Battlestar Galactica and Doctor Who, and like they maybe watched more than Star Trek to see what is successful as science fiction in the modern world. I liked that the trial and the verdict and the promo at the end. The trial, at first I thought, what a weird subjective depiction of her experience of a trial. Like, we're not actually seeing the faces of Starfleet captains. That's not like Starfleet. Starfleet's going to try you publicly, and you'll be convicted and court-martialed in a way that, like, you know your accusers. And it's not like odd. Weird. Yeah, it was like weirdly dark. However, the way that they said the council cannot hear you or whatever, and the fact that their faces were in darkness, I think that was intentional. I think she had done such a criminal thing, because mutiny is like, I'm not sure we've ever seen somebody specifically put to trial for mutiny on Star Trek before. Maybe you guys.
We've seen plenty of mutiny.
We've never seen a court-martial, have we? Not in this context. Not in this kind of.
We see Kirk court-martialed in season 1 of the original series for supposedly killing Ben Finney by ejecting him from like an impulse sensor pod or something. But I don't know. I mean, that's the one kind of glaring perpendicularity. It's like, well, why is this happening? Like, what's going on? But I get the sense that there's at least an explanation in terms of, like, within the show, they're not showing their faces because they're condemning her to a certain kind of life. And it like, fundamentally puts them at odds with each other in some way, that you don't want her to be aware of those people who condemned her. Maybe that's my explanation. What do you guys think?
They're also in a state of war, sudden war. They're scrambling the ships. They're probably doing this court martial in a really ad hoc way because they don't have the resources that they would usually do.
Yeah, maybe this is the first exclusively wartime court martial we've seen. You know?
Yeah, we had talked previously about why it is that the level of technology in the original series seems so much less than in this.
Oh yeah, we should talk about that.
I had brought up the concept that maybe this is going to be about the onset of an economic recession, and they're going to have to sell other technology.
Yeah, that was
maybe we're starting to see that happen.
It was really just a recession, which is hilarious, and boring. Go ahead, though.
That'll be season 2.
All the Klingons' fault. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, now it's justifiable. Now it makes sense. Now it has its place in Star Trek. If there's economic fallout that forces them to use lesser technology or less snazzy looking technology, it makes sense from a war that they almost lost.
When you win a war, it's usually good for your economy. So I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe
I don't
nobody
think either
wins.
of them won. I don't think either of them won. So
that's right. They still need to be in a Cold War state at the end.
Yeah. So I liked the cinematic quality for all the visuals. I liked that on my television when you see the conference room table, I could see dust on the conference room table in Georgiou's ready room, which was quite big, incidentally. She's got the biggest ready room. I think it's also a conference room. I think they just kind of combined those two for her.
Good.
I liked the thruster suit. That was cool.
It was similar to the motion picture.
Yeah, except it's more maneuverable.
Including the countdown sequence. Although the countdown sequence took a lot longer in the motion picture.
Yeah, it did, and it felt like it took a lot longer too, which is worse. The sound effects, though, I thought that was brilliant. If you look close or you listen closely, you can hear the TOS bridge sound effects when they're on the bridge. You can hear communicator chirps. You can hear stuff from Voyager. I mean,
it runs the gamut of every series.
Yeah, they have kind of a standard sound effect cache that they must just run through over the next 200 years or the next 100 years of Star Trek. What should we choose for the red alert? Well, maybe we should choose this sound. We've used it before. This is a good idea, yeah. So there's that. The setting, music, and visuals are beautiful. It's Russo. He did the music. Jeff Russo did the music for House of Cards. It's haunting and really works well, and then he works well here. I like the torchbearer. I feel like we needed more explanation or exploration for him. What's his purpose? I mean, metaphorically, clearly, he's the torchbearer that sparks the war. Really, so there's some stuff to work out around the Klingons. I like, and this is really subtle, when Burnham is first meets the torchbearer, it identifies the iconography as the symbol for a Klingon house, not the Klingon Empire, but a Klingon house, which, just like the symbol for the Enterprise, the Delta Shield, becomes the Starfleet symbol for everybody, the symbol for the Klingon house, I think, becomes the symbol for the Empire, because that house conquers the rest or leads the rest. And we don't actually know if Takuvma that was his symbol, or I think it probably was. So that means he was victorious eventually.
It could be.
What do you guys think?
The problem is that when the Klingon ships start showing up at the end of the first episode, the icon that appears on the screen is that symbol again for all the ships, which we know represent each of the 24 houses, although they don't know that. So I don't know.
Oh, right. Well, maybe that actually makes sense, as maybe they only encountered that house in the past, and that's what Starfleet has accorded as the symbol for the Klingons, even though they don't know that it's just a symbol for one of the houses. I mean, they know that the Klingons had 24 houses, but they might not know everything.
It's a bit complicated.
Yeah, it's a bit complicated. Part of why, Shaniqua's character Burnham has to be trained in their 24 houses. And it seems like the Vulcans have a subtler grasp on the Klingons than Starfleet and the Federation at large. It's kind of interesting because, like, they still have a separateness from the rest of the Federation, which is a really cool sort of inflection from Enterprise, right? The Vulcans were this very resistant, often unfriendly, unhelpful, smug, arrogant, superior race throughout Enterprise, and they were kind of held aloof and apart from Starfleet and the humans. And so, like, I'm not saying they're that way at all here, because they've clearly taken on the teachings of Serac and all of that in the past 100 years, and they've developed into really good allies to the Federation. However, there are still things that the humans don't know about the Vulcans, things that they don't share. And so maybe even the Vulcans know that, hey, well, no, I guess they did also use that symbol. Maybe there are things that the Vulcans don't know about the Klingons either. Like, I mean, that's part of the point. That's part of the point for this show, is that there are things for us to discover about Star Trek and about the Klingons and the characters to discover about themselves. And you can do this little play on words and, you know, continue in that vein. But, yeah, there's something to talk about with the insignia in the future, I think. There's a new computer voice, which there was at least one or two computer voices that were not Majel Barrett throughout TOS, so that fits. This was really well written. There was a lot of good suspense and curiosity that drew me back after every act. I mean, of course, I'm going to watch the whole thing, but, like, after every single act, you were left in this space of, like, oh, my God, what's going to happen next? And I like that their whole relationship between Burnham and Georgiou was summarized in this one line where she looks at her captain and she says, "Permission to leave the bridge. It's relevant." Right? That's like Picard and Riker. Picard and Riker after 7 years. Like I trust this guy under my command. We work well together. Yeah, you're laughing at the "it's relevant" part.
Oh, no, I just thought it was a clever scene.
Oh, yeah. So there are a couple bigger things to talk about with this, and then we can respond to the other people. I think that the Prime timeline Trek has been inflected by the Kelvin timeline Trek. I mean, like, at least in portrayal, and we mentioned this with the, like, there's lens flares and all of that, but, like, I think there's one way of viewing this, which is that this is yet a different universe. Like, this is not the Prime timeline. I know they're really working hard to make it the Prime timeline and to fit into that.
It's the Prime timeline. We're not going to question that.
Oh.
I don't want to go down the path of questioning that.
Yeah, that's actually, I accept that. That's actually a legitimate.
Oh, no, I don't want to hold you back if you want to make a point, but personally.
Well, I mean, no, there wasn't much about that. It was more about the production of the show. Like, the production of the show took into account, and it's got Alex Kurtzman, who worked on the movies, as one of the executive producers. So clearly he's going to remember, hey, everybody liked these things that we did on the big screen. Let's do them again. Let's do them in a different way. And really, honestly, the response to anybody who says, oh, this doesn't look anything like TOS, or oh, this looks too much like Kelvin Trek, is, well, welcome to 2017. I mean, like, what are you going to tell them? Don't use the modern technology. Don't make it flashy and look good. Don't make it elegant and pretty and beautiful. Don't make it follow what we know people want to see. I mean, this is a product. This is being sold to us. Some of us spent money on it. So, you know, it's catering to its audience, and I accept that's part of the conditions for the thing existing. I'm happy that it exists at all, and I'm okay with little slight modifications, though I think there's a chance at explanation, and I'm also really grateful that they didn't make it drab, dry, boring, and dull like the Cage was. I mean, like, if you take the technology back to the 60s, who's going to watch that? I mean, maybe super diehards, but I can tell you I would have probably watched it.
No, I wouldn't.
I mean, I'm not sure that I would have loved it, but yeah. So there's that, and then there's like one or two more points that I wanted to make. Then let's start responding. Well, you guys have some more stuff, I'm sure. The Death Fleet or the Dark Fleet. I like that was a really cool title for the
Klingon Afterlife?
Yeah.
That was the Black Fleet.
Yeah.
The Black Fleet, yeah.
It's this kind of sense of a religion in space, which is really cool. I mean, like not just our graveyard is a moving ship, but the Death Fleet. Like, there's a fleet that you all join in the afterlife, and it's traveling the universe. Other things, it would be unwise to confuse race and culture. That was cool. That was a really subtle Star Trek philosophical point. Anybody want to speak to that?
I'm not sure exactly what she was getting at, but I'll take it.
Yeah. It's.
I mean, the Klingons are, they're not the same biologically as humans. And to say that their only difference is culture, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's destroying their individuality, atom by atom.
Good point.
Restate that. Maybe I'll understand better.
Michael Burnham is saying it's just their culture that makes them different. Implied underneath, they're just the same as us. They're aliens, though. These aren't humans. If the Klingons think the Federation is sort of subtly impinging on them, is going to take away their individuality, it seems like this is exactly how the Federation is going to do it.
By not distinguishing culture from race?
By insisting that they're all the same.
Huh. Yeah, that's the implication. It's the implication behind the Federation, really. It's this notion that we are all one, we are all similar, and that's the real philosophical depth to their objection. Is like, hey, we are not the. I don't want to know you. We're not the same. So let's see. Last couple things. This was a very subtle point, and of course I'm going to talk about it because I'm a diehard raw vegan who's mostly fruitarian. Lieutenant Saru says, "We are your livestock of old," and that's why he's developed this prey capacity to evade predators. And so what I've seen in Star Trek, and there's a couple good articles online that suggest this, is that people in the future are vegan. People no longer hunt and kill and murder animals to fill their bodies with toxicity and acidity, causing all these diseases we suffer from, like diabetes and cancer and lymphatic system issues. People are actually eating some kind of, and I don't know if replicator food is any better, honestly, but at least we're not like destroying the ecosystem and harming our bodies and our children with what we consume. And Riker says to somebody in one of the earlier seasons of Next Gen, he says, "Yeah, we no longer consume meat. Like we don't eat meat. We don't hunt and eat meat like we used to." And so I think that's really subtle point. Star Trek doesn't drive it home. Doesn't really need everybody to agree with it. And you've still got an Enterprise, people eating like steak and whatever. But and like people will always want to have stuff that tastes like that. Hence replicators. And with replicators, you can make basically whatever you want, taste however you want, without it having a negative impact on any environment, except maybe your body if it's like some kind of synthetic stuff. But
the energy usage of the synthesizer. Yeah,
maybe that's the only sort of reference.
Maybe it's powered by dirty coal.
I don't think so somehow. So now we're going to shift gears just a little bit, and I'd like to respond to some of the people who commented on my post about Discovery earlier today, because that's where we're going to be posting this. But before I do that, I know, Richard, you have some comments prepared, right?
I've already covered all the points that I wanted to make.
Oh, okay. Well, cool. So Thomas Vinson, a friend of mine, said, quote, "I thought it was devoid of any thought, plot, or point. Just another formula show where bad guys attack good guys with a bunch of explosions and jumping and fighting. Diplomacy was portrayed as weak and naive. War is the only logical choice. Not at all Star Trek." End quote. I think that's a fundamental misperception, Thomas. Diplomacy was portrayed as weak and naive in comparison with a culture that they didn't understand, and they refused to understand. Like, Georgiou refused to understand them and refused to allow them their radical otherness, as post-structuralist, postmodernism might put it. Like, they are who they are and they're different than us. And you can't really reduce it or shift it or give them equal rights because that doesn't even make sense to them. So there was a really subtle series of philosophical points, making it not devoid of thought and points. Bad guys attack good guys. Yeah, it wasn't that uncomplicated. It was nuanced and intricate. Like you have the loyalty versus what will save everyone's life within Burnham. Stephen Gerton says, I was kind of with Thomas Vinson. The Abramsification continues. Yeah, I hear your point. I know you don't want Star Trek to be just those movies, but with it back on television, we're able to deal with intricacy. And intricacy of character is far more important than intricacy of plot and theme, really, because they should emerge and arise organically from character. Character's where we're at as a culture with art and fiction. So and that's what the Abrams films do really well, characters and character arcs. So I don't mind that aspect because that's always been there and it's just gotten better recently. But as far as the lens flares and the action, yeah, you need that to draw enough people in to pay for the thing. I mean, okay. Right? Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
You do, but I also think you could be someone who hates the Abrams movies and really still deeply enjoy this. Because there's a lot more than the space violence because of all the things we've been talking about this whole time.
Yeah. I think the plot was I'm just going to go on with his to finish his quote. The plot felt shallow to me. The most interesting thing was the mutiny, but that felt somewhat confused, which we kind of addressed earlier. Sarek instructs child Michael to master the emotional pain of her parents' loss, and years later advises an emotional preemptive strike on the Klingons. Steve, you just misunderstood what happened. He didn't advise her to do anything. He gave her information and warned her very specifically on how to use it. And then she was emotionally motivated to some extent, but also logically, which is the whole central thrust of her character. It's interesting because there's this ambiguity there. And, I think she was as Vulcan as T'Pol, as Vulcan as Spock, as Vulcan as Sarek.
She had the capacity to act in that Vulcan way if she wanted to, and that was what made it cool.
Yeah, it's an option for her. It's a thing it's a gear that she shifts into, which makes it more interesting. Yeah. It's like because Spock was a Vulcan trying to resist incorporating his humanity into himself. Michael Burnham is a human who has successfully incorporated her Vulcanness into herself and is committed to full expression as a human. So she gets the best of both worlds. She really does. So let's see. Renee Harbison says they spent more time on set design than plot design. I mean, maybe. I don't care because it was good. But, yeah, I mean, also for the plot, for the pilot, you're going to spend more time on developing those aspects that you're going to use for the rest of the show than necessarily the plot. I felt the plot was good. Lisa Clemens says, didn't watch it, leery of watching it. From what I'm reading, I'm probably better off not watching it. That's a judgment. That's speaking exactly to what Sarek said, right? Don't let your preconceptions be careful that your assumptions are not being driven by your past, and you must challenge your preconceptions, or they will challenge you. Is something he said in the trailers. Did anybody else notice that he kind of was mean in the trailers, insulting her tongue, and they didn't have that here? Kind of a deleted scene.
It might still happen.
It might still happen. You're right. Let's see. We're almost done. There's just a couple more comments. Jessica McNear says, damn, sounds like it wasn't fans who were hired to write. That is, in fact, the opposite of the truth. At the Las Vegas convention, the fans did interviews, and each and every one of the writers are deep, loving, powerful fans who've loved Star Trek. For a couple of them, it was the very first thing that they saw when they were growing up. And Kirsten Bear wrote the Voyager relaunch novels. Nicholas Meyer wrote Star Trek II. So, I mean, they really wanted to respect the fans, and the writers are real fans themselves. Let's see. Almost done. Entertaining but flawed, Kenneth Adam Smith says. Maybe. Aggressive Vulcans and illogical mutiny and utter contempt for diplomacy mark it as odd among the Star Trek franchise. I mean, the Klingons were against diplomacy, for sure.
The Vulcans weren't. Look, there's a sense that people think it's weird for the Vulcans to be violent because they think violence is illogical, and that's crazy. Sometimes violence is logical. If you think violence is never logical, then you really haven't thought it through. And I think actually the fact that the Vulcans are violent here really deepens their logicalness. It's an aspect of it we've never seen before. Michael Burnham says, violence brought respect, respect brought peace. that's a very logical way of thinking. It's nothing like we've ever seen in Star Trek before. It's completely consistent with the Vulcans. I think this is the thing that really made the Vulcans better, this whole idea. The idea that this is out of character for the Vulcans is nuts.
Yeah, I agree. Adam continues, this is odd among the Star Trek franchise, but this was against the zealous faction of Klingons uninterested in diplomacy. When have Klingons ever been interested in diplomacy? I mean, throughout all of it. They enjoy
fighting.
What's that?
Klingons enjoy fighting. That's why they're fun. They're not interested in diplomacy.
Yeah. So all throughout Enterprise, every time the crew meets them, the Klingons are not interested in. They won't have any of it. I mean, like any of the diplomacy, any of the friendliness. They're just kind of grumpy and angry and fighty. And so let's see. Klingons uninterested in diplomacy, so it somewhat fits, but it's awkward and carried by bad dialogue. I don't know. The dialogue was decent throughout it. Mostly a waste of good cast and an effort to establish a franchise that is already established. Now that's a good. I mean, like if someone took this to be trying to establish the franchise, then it would be wasted. But I mean, I don't even think it was trying to do that. I think the flourish of the Star Trek theme and the Delta Shield in the very first scene were like with the writers winking to the audience, like saying, "Hey, Star Trek's back, bitch," something like that. Like, "Hey, we're really proud of this." So he says he'll give it a few more episodes to see what they do with their setup, which is great. So yeah. Last comment from particularly since that Klingon group are apparently a bunch of cultist Klingon nationalists that presumably do not speak for the whole Empire. Federation striking first seems like a great way to pick a fight with all of the Klingons. Yeah, well, that's why it's dramatic, is because, like, we don't know what the right decision really was. It's ambiguous. It's gray. We're still not sure, right?
Yeah, it could be that if they had fired first, then when the Great Houses showed up, they would have been like, "How come you got in this fight, man? Looks like you just got beat." And then they would have just gone. And the whole, Civil War that's about to happen. Yeah. We don't know. The Klingons aren't human. They respond to violence.
Yeah. One of the questions the writers posed in the After Trek, which I kind of recommend, was that, hey, we don't know if this will actually work to unite the Empire. It may not. So we'll find out. But there's that was it for the responses to comments. My plan with this in the future is to post these podcasts in response to comments or as a provocation to comments, and then we can respond to them in the future and have an engaging dialogue with our listeners. I think that'd be cool. So yeah. Anyway, I feel like we've kind of exhausted this.
Perhaps.
Closing
Maybe.
thoughts, summary?
I thought it was fun.
Same here.
I'm gonna quote Worf and say, "Good tea."
Champagne.
By ship. Paraphrasing.
Good ship. Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. This was fun to make. We'll be on next week with the next episode. It'll be a shorter podcast, and we'll have more details and fun. This has been awesome. Thank you, Tyler. And
it's fun to be here. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much, Richard, as well.
Thank you. Good luck.
All right, guys. Well, ending this, live long and prosper, or Vulcan goodbye.
Vulcan goodbye.